Welcome, Lunch with Sandra. Happy to have some new people with us today. And thanks, Susie, for joining. Okay, today's topic. I'm really excited about this topic because it has brought so much awareness in my own relationship. Angie, thanks for joining. I've got some other people that are just coming on. So, okay, the ego. Today we're going to talk about how the ego is affecting your relationships. We're going to talk about what the ego is, where it came from, why it's important, and how to release it, what we can do to release it. And then we're going to find out if it's affecting your relationships and how to heal it in your relationships. So the ego is one of my favorite topics because when I really discovered how often I'm in ego, it allows me then to go, oh, wait a minute, I don't need this anymore, and I can let it go. So to start with, let's talk about what the ego is and how you know that the ego is present. Okay, so the ego is an identity that we pick up right around the age of my granddaughter, actually, who's just turned 2. So we picked it up probably just prior to turning 2. And this is the stage where you start realizing that you have an identity separate than your family, or separate than your parents, or separate than your siblings. And it's the time that you start saying mine, or me do it, or me. So you'll recognize when a child first picks up their ego because everything will be mine, me. They'll be learning the terms I. And my daughter, I remember when she was really just developing her ego, she would hold out her hands and go like this to me, and she would say, hold, see me, hold, see me. And she was obviously telling me it was time to hold her. So being aware when the ego gets developed is really important, and why the ego gets developed. It's really important, actually. Don't hate the ego altogether, because as children, we need that ego. We need the ego, first of all, to help us see that we are separate, and it helps start to build a confidence within us as children, that we're capable of doing things on our own. Me do it. So being aware that the ego has a purpose, and it's actually a good purpose when we're babies, when we're toddlers, that the ego helps us to be able to see, okay, I have an identity, and I am not my mom, and I am not my dad. Okay, so at what age does the ego start to become problematic? We're going to go over how you know you're in the ego and what the ego is doing to you. So sorry, I don't have my tripod. Thanks, Kathy, for joining. But it looks like it's sitting up now. Okay, so what happens is there's 5 elements that we want to watch for in the ego. Number 1 is when you notice that you are judging yourself. When you are putting yourself above someone else, or when you're putting yourself below someone else, you're in ego. So it's just the judgments, recognizing when you're in a judgment and how that judgment is affecting you, whether you're putting yourself above someone or below someone. The second way to know that you're in an ego is by becoming defensive. So if somebody is telling you something and you automatically get reactive and you start defending yourself, it's kind of this kind of energy. What happens is when somebody mentions something and you'll notice a feeling well up inside that you need to attack or you need to defend yourself, you're in your ego. Number 3, you can't hear constructive criticism. Let's say somebody says, hey, let's say it's a work project, like you did a fabulous job on the work project, and next time can you do it this and this and this, add that to your work project. And if you notice the defenses that come up and the feelings that you need to attack or that you need to blame someone else for a job that didn't get done. So notice when you start blaming someone else for your work or blaming someone else, period, or trying to focus the attention when somebody says, and I notice that I do this in marriage, right? When my husband will say something about, oh, you didn't put this away. Then immediately I go to all the things he hasn't put away. And being aware that we do this all the time. When somebody tells us something that we need to be doing, we immediately put it on them and say, you need to be doing it. That's the ego. Also, realizing when you have to become defensive, when you blame the other person, when you have a difficult time apologizing. Let's say that in a certain situation, you could have been better in that situation, but you don't want to apologize, or you can't apologize. You have a difficult time apologizing and owning it. That's another symptom of being in your ego. And the fifth one to be aware of is that other people, or you don't want to apologize. Here's the other thing, that other people can't apologize to you because then you make yourself feel superior to them when they do apologize. So in the past, if a person has come to you and apologized and you go, yeah, this is a problem that you really have, and you drive shame into them, then it's going to stop them from wanting to come to apologize to you in the future. And our ego is present all along our relationships. It's rarely that our ego's not present. Realizing that the ego gets present and it's driven in the feelings of not being good enough. So what I found interesting watching my own ego and observing it is that in the ego, it's not just about feelings. Sorry for that, pause. Not about feeling superior to someone, but it's also feeling inferior. So the ego just isn't about telling someone how great you are, but it's also telling someone how bad you are. And you know what I'm talking about. Somebody who's always apologizing, always saying, oh, that's not good enough, or they're always putting themselves down. That is also the ego, believe it or not. So it's any identity that you put on yourself that puts you above someone or below someone. And that's an important piece to notice. I also call your pattern cycle, the way that you act in life, the ego, any time that you're not feeling good enough. So how do you heal it? Great question, right? Well, to do any kind of healing, I take you through what's called the awaken process. And the awaken process is just an acronym that I use to really help me in my relationships and my patterns to be aware when I'm in the pattern. The awaken is an acronym and it stands for being aware that you're in your pattern, being aware that you're in your ego, being willing to drop the ego, which is really hard because the ego is there to define us and protect us from not having an identity. So being aware that it's there, being willing to let it go, asking the questions, where would I be without my ego? Where would I be without this challenge? Where would I be without feeling not good enough, or without needing to prove myself? Where would I be? Being aware that right now on my emotional scale, I have you check in with where you're at on the emotional scale. If you're down in the lower numbers, you're in your ego. 0 to 10, 10 being the best you've ever felt, 0 being at hopeless, I want to die. Well, if you're in those lower numbers, you're in your ego because you're making judgments about the world outside you. You're comparing yourself. And that's a good sign you're in your ego. So being aware, being willing to drop the ego, that it's not serving you, asking, where would I be without this ego, which then provides knowledge and spiritual knowledge about who you are. Embracing the ego. I know, right? Why do we want to embrace the ego? When you embrace the challenge that you're going through, like it's okay that I have this challenge, then it allows you to move through it. It's okay that I have this problem. It's okay that I'm in this difficult moment in my relationships. So when you embrace or allow that those relationships are challenging, it allows you to heal them and move forward. And then the N is stay in the now. And the reason the N is so important to stay in the now is truly the now is where you're most powerful to create a life you love, to heal the relationship, to create something else going on inside the head and inside the heart. Okay, so let's look at, you'll see on the Facebook post, on the picture that I posted, those elements about the ego, and noticing when you're in the relationship, in your relationships with the ego, and also when your loved ones are in their ego, when they're in the need to defend themselves and the need to argue and the need to prove that they're right and can't apologize. How do you handle difficult people in your life that are also in their ego? Great question. First of all, being aware that every relationship around you, every relationship is created from the laws of attraction. So what your frequency is, or what you're vibrating, is attracting these people into your life so that you can heal the ego. And so bless them. Bless those difficult people in your life that need to be in the ego all the time. They are also a reflection of your ego to a degree. And the more that you react to that person, the more your frequency is matching theirs. The more defensive you become when they become defensive. The more accusatory you become when they're accusing you. And it goes, these two egos are fighting back and forth. And honestly, you can't get anywhere when both parties are operating from the ego. Okay, so first of all, be aware when I'm in the ego, when I'm being in my ego, and the way that I know it is I am judging myself as less than. The interesting thing about your pattern cycle is realizing that when you go into the ego, you're not going to notice it. It's so fast. Your brain, your neural paths are sending messages so quickly that you don't even notice how fast that you're processing information. So that first step of awaken, the awareness, is huge. I can't emphasize it enough. Be aware. And what I do is I pay attention to my body. So everybody, we're going to do a little exercise. Go into the last time you were upset and just sit with that for just a moment. So it could have been the last 24 hours when you were upset at yourself or someone else. Okay, breathe, and then go within your body and notice where that upset resides in your body. Where do your upsets reside? So it's interesting, as I give full attention to my body, I notice that it's in the pit of my gut, and then it moves up to the throat, and then a heaviness in my heart. And by being aware of what chakras and what organs that upset affects, also helps you to know perhaps when you're in it and you don't know that you're in it, because you might notice a lump in your throat. You might notice heaviness on your chest. You might notice feeling really antsy. Get to know your body. It is crucial to your healing because your body is a communicator. And that's another video that we'll do about our bodies. But your body is communicating to you when you're in an upset. And if you're in an upset, then you're in the ego. So being aware that, okay, my body is reacting. I may feel anxious. I may feel that lump in my throat, or I may feel a pain in my neck. Be aware of what you're feeling and why you're feeling it. Go to what is going on with my body right now. What's the message my body's sending me? To be aware that you're in your ego because you're having the need to be defensive right now. You're having the need to accuse someone of something. You're having a difficult time apologizing, or you're afraid to apologize. And it's a lot of finger pointing. As soon as you're finger pointing the energy out here, it's really coming back to you, and two people are doing this together. And it's coming back to you in your body. So be aware of that. Okay, so what do you do when you're in the middle of an upset, or somebody is doing something, their ego is triggering your ego? First of all, I recommend don't try to do conflict resolution with someone when both of you are in your ego. Because what that does is it creates, as you know, the egoic fight, which the more you push, the more the other one pushes. So call a timeout. You can notice if the voices escalate, if your voices are escalating or you're not getting anywhere. Sometimes you can just agree to disagree, but a lot of times in the moment, you can't do that. So being aware that, okay, in this moment, I feel it right here, and it's building up and it wants to explode. So be aware in that moment, back away from the trigger, back away from the relationship. And it's okay for you to say, look, I need a timeout. I need to go take a deep breath. I need to go get some cool air. And come and process it with me. Get with a technician. I have a section in your MOG journal, the Meditate on the Go journal, of upsets that helps you to process your upset. So write it out. What caused the upset? And take ownership, 100% ownership of how you feel. Quit saying you make me feel a certain way. You're giving away your power anytime that you say you make me feel this way or that way. Okay, so take 100% ownership of it. And then take 100% ownership of what's going on in your head. Are you defensive in this moment? Do you need to defend yourself? Or can you say, let's just agree to disagree and walk away? So realizing when somebody else is attacking you and you have a need to defend, it's not going to do you any good to sit and defend. Instead, you can simply say to the person, we need a timeout. We can come back when we're both calmed down and we can talk about your side of the story. We can talk about my side of the story. We can talk about the perceptions that are going on and understand that sometimes we can just agree to disagree. And it's not about who's wrong and who's right. Of course, this is all easier said than done when you're in the moment of the upset. Okay, so notice when you go out in public and you start projecting inadequacies on other people. So when you're out in public, for example, and you start noticing that you're making judgments on other people, to make yourself feel better. Like, oh my gosh, what is she wearing? Why is she wearing that? If she only knew what she looked like right now, she would not be wearing that. Anytime you're doing those kinds of remarks or judgments in your head, you're in the ego, and that lowers your frequency or your vibration. So realize that that is not serving you, and that's actually hurting you. That's lowering your frequency. So be aware of judgments, making yourself better than other people. Be aware the moment that you feel that you need to prove yourself. Be aware the moment that you go into the arguing and you have this great need to then prove something. Whenever you're in the energy of proving something, you've gone back into what I call your deceptive identity, which is this identity that we take on at a very young age that says, I'm not good enough. And the moment that you do that, that's when you have the need to defend yourself. You become defensive when you're in your pattern, you're not good enough's pattern. So just realize you're in it. Be willing to take a step back. Be really willing to own it 100%. Own the defensiveness. Own your defensiveness. And then be willing to change it. Take a deep breath and go, in this moment, I don't need to defend myself. Now, something that I do that's really helpful or been really helpful in my relationships or in my upsets actually, because your upsets aren't always with a relationship in that moment, but realize that the ego is a separate identity. It is the identity that you picked up at the young age. And when you can own that identity as a separate identity, as something that you've picked up to protect yourself, then it will help you to be aware you're in the identity. So I recommend that you actually name your identities, name that ego. And it could be something really, really silly that you can name Judge Judy, for example. That could be a name that you give your ego. So the part of you that needs to judge, the part of you that needs to judge yourself, the part of you that needs to judge other people. And be aware when that Judge Judy comes out and you just go, oh, hi, Judge Judy. Just the aware and naming it and calling it by its name helps bring down the level of your upset or your SUDS, your subjective unit of distress. Be aware how much Judge Judy is occupying your life. It's pretty fascinating when you become that aware of your thoughts and feelings. Also be aware when you feel like I've done something that I need to apologize and I don't want to apologize or I can't apologize. Now there's a reason that we don't apologize in life. This is a good moment to bring this up. We want to ask ourselves, what's stopping me from owning my piece of this and apologizing? And you'll find that with your difficult relationships, you're afraid to apologize because you might feel like the other person is going to use that against you in the future. And in that case, I would simply say, I owe you an apology, and part of me doesn't want to give you that apology because I think that you might use it against me. And just being able to acknowledge that and say that kind of helps you to heal it, and it also helps the other person to realize that they might do that in their pattern. And then in the moment that it comes up in the future, I would say, it feels like in this moment you're using my apology or my vulnerability to hurt me or to come back at me. And so I don't want to participate in this conversation right now because it's not helping me. And being aware that your ego will have the need to pull back the apology or blame the other person when you're apologizing. So I recommend when you say to somebody, I'm sorry, when you're cleaning up a relationship, that you don't do, I'm sorry, but, to explain why you did that certain behavior. Instead, own it 100% and say, I'm sorry, and. So it's I'm sorry for the behavior that I did, and this is why I did it, rather than but, because that's like saying, I love you, but your behavior really constitutes me not liking you very much right now. So it's saying, I love you, and your behavior isn't very nice right now. So it's not discounting the apology, or it's not discounting the love that you have, but instead it's saying, and this is why I did what I did. Now, be aware when you have an I'm sorry and this is why I did what I did, that you don't go into blaming and pointing your finger and accusing the other person, because That's not really that's not the point of the apology. Then you're then blaming the other person for your behavior, and you just wiped the apology away. So being aware that when you apologize to somebody for certain behaviors, own it 100%. And when you need to explain the behavior, then use the words and rather than but. Okay. Any questions that we have? So we want to know, first of all, when we're in the ego, when it's running the relationship, how to heal the ego using the AWAKEN acronym, being aware, being willing. Be aware you're in ego, be willing to drop it. Ask, where would you be without it? Gain more knowledge. Embrace the experience. You're learning something from it, and write it out in a journal. Stay in the now. So in my past videos, I've talked about how you stay in the now. When you're aware that your brain is going so quickly, then you can go, okay, right now, I'm going to use my senses, the presencing game, I call it. The presencing game is use your 5 senses to come to the now, right here. And it's 5 things I see right now. And so I would go, I see light, I see my daughter's paint on the wall, which, by the way, I'm at her home in Virginia. Isn't that great? I can work wherever I want. I see the camera, I see the plant, I see pictures on the wall. And then you go into what is 4 things that you can smell right, or 4 things you can hear right now. That one's pretty easy. 3 things that you can feel, texture, okay? What, the chair, my pants, my hair. What are 3 things? 3 things you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. That's the presencing exercise. It brings you to the now, which will calm down anxiety immensely. When you're feeling anxious and your thoughts are obsessing, use the presencing exercises. I have many, many tools to help bring anxiety down, but being aware when your SUDs are high, the subjective unit of distress, choosing down on the emotional scale, and using some tapping. We did tapping in our other video, tapping to bring it down, using paced breathing, which is breathing up, counting 8, breathing down to the count of 10. It's just counting your breaths while you're pace breathing, using temperature to bring down your high SUDs, ice packs, get in a cold shower, dunk your face in cold ice water if your SUDs are really high, because it stops the brain from processing and says we've got to manage this current situation, which is we might die holding our breath in this ice cold water. And it hits the parasympathetic nervous system. So the temperature helps bring down your SUDs, changing the temperature. Run, go for a run, go box, move some energy, go outside, get some deep breaths, get grounded, get your feet in the grass, feel the outside air. So lots of tools that I use to bring down SUDs, but you've got to be aware when your SUDs are really high so that you can bring them down. Okay, do we have any questions? Let's see. Okay, being aware when you're in the ego so that you can choose to walk away or calm down the ego, talk to it, let it know it's okay. One of the things I do is, hey, Judge Judy, you're okay. You don't need to prove yourself right now. Being aware and bringing it down. And being aware when your relationships, the ones that are near and dear to you, and your beloveds, that they're in their ego, they're not in a time to do conflict resolution, so don't try. Set up another time when that person can calm down to do conflict resolution. And set healthy boundaries, people. No one can treat you any which way without your consent. If you don't like the relationship you're in, get out of it. ask for what you want, set healthy boundaries. You can get out of your ego, and your egoic relationships around you can learn by your example when you're in your own ego, to own it 100% and then do the steps that we talked about to correct that behavior. Okay, so every Monday we meet for lunch. Join us next Monday. Next Monday, we're going to be talking about drama in your relationships, how to eliminate drama from yourself and from your relationships, and how to know when you're in drama and how to release it. Thank you guys so much for joining. Namaste. Put your fingertips together. Get yourself grounded. Tongue on the roof of the mouth. Come to the present moment. I choose to be in this present moment. If you need a session, feel free to message me. And if you would like to train to be an intuitive life coach, you can also message me. It's a fabulous life. And of course, I love my life, but I have a lot of freedom to do what I want when I want. Thank you everyone for joining, and I look forward to seeing you guys on future videos. Namaste.